You walk into a room and immediately feel like everyone is judging your every word and movement. Every conversation feels forced and awkward, leaving you replaying embarrassing moments long after they're over, while others seem to effortlessly charm their way through any social situation. I am Dale Carnegie, and I transformed from a painfully shy farm boy who was terrified of public speaking into someone who taught millions how to win friends and influence people. What I discovered about overcoming social awkwardness will transform how you connect with others, giving you the confidence to walk into any room and make genuine connections that feel natural and authentic. The same principles that helped me conquer my crippling shyness can help you turn your social anxiety into your greatest strength. But first, like this video, subscribe for more life-changing wisdom, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready to master the art of human connection. Let me take you back to a small farm in Missouri, where I grew up as Dale Carnegie. I later changed the spelling to Carnegie. Picture a scrawny boy who would rather milk cows in solitude than face a room full of people. That was me, trapped in what I can only describe as a prison of my own making, prison built from fear, doubt, and crushing social anxiety. My childhood was marked by poverty and isolation. We lived on a farm where the nearest neighbor was miles away, and social interaction was as rare as a good harvest in a drought year. When I did encounter other people, I would freeze up completely. My heart would pound so hard I was certain everyone could hear it. My palms would sweat, my voice would crack, and I would stumble over the simplest words. I remember one particular Sunday when my father took me to church, small wooden building where maybe 30 people gathered each week. The preacher asked if anyone had anything to share about their week's blessings. I had something I desperately wanted to say. Our old milk cow had finally recovered from illness, and I was genuinely grateful. But when I tried to stand up, my legs turned to jelly. The words stuck in my throat like they were glued there. I sat back down, burning with shame, while others shared their thoughts effortlessly. That wooden podium at the front of the church became a symbol of everything I feared most. It represented judgment, exposure, and the terrifying possibility of making a fool of myself in front of others. I would stare at it during every sermon, both longing to approach it and dreading the very thought. My social anxiety wasn't just about public speaking, infected every interaction. At the general store in town, I would practice conversations in my head for hours before entering, only to mumble a barely audible thank you to the shopkeeper. When other farm families visited, I would hide in the barn rather than join the adults on the porch. Even simple greetings with neighbors made me feel like I was under intense scrutiny. The worst part wasn't the fear itself, it was the loneliness that followed. I began to believe I was fundamentally different from other people, that I lacked some essential quality that made social interaction natural and enjoyable. I convinced myself that I was destined to be an outsider, watching life happen around me but never truly participating in it. But here's what I didn't understand then. That wooden podium wasn't just a symbol of my fear. It was also going to become the very place where I would discover my true calling and learn the principles that would transform not just my own life, but the lives of millions of others. The prison I had built around myself was about to become the foundation for the greatest adventure of my life. The moment that shattered my world and rebuilt it happened when I was 18 years old. Standing outside the debate team meeting room at State Teachers College in Warrensburg, Missouri. I had spent weeks preparing for this audition, memorizing speeches, practicing in front of my mirror until my roommate thought I'd lost my mind. I believed this was my chance to finally prove I could overcome my crippling shyness. When I walked into that room, 12 confident students were already seated around a mahogany table. The debate coach, Professor Overstreet, barely looked up from his papers as I introduced myself with a voice that sounded like a strangled whisper. He handed me a topic: should the United States adopt a policy of imperialism? And gave me 10 minutes to prepare a 3-minute argument. My hands trembling, I scribbled notes that looked like chicken scratches. When called upon, I stood behind that familiar wooden podium, the same type that had haunted me since childhood. The words I had practiced so carefully vanished from my mind like smoke. I stammered through disjointed sentences, my argument collapsing into incomprehensible fragments. The other students exchanged glances that felt like daggers. Professor Overstreet's rejection was swift and merciless. "Mr. Carnegie," he said, not even bothering to look at me, "the debate team requires students who can think clearly under pressure and communicate with confidence. Perhaps you should consider a different extracurricular activity." That rejection letter, though it was delivered, verbally felt like a physical blow. I walked back to my dormitory room in a daze, convinced that I was fundamentally flawed, destined to remain on the sidelines of life forever. I lay on my narrow bed that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every stammered word and awkward pause. But something remarkable happened in those dark hours. Instead of wallowing in self-pity, a spark of defiance ignited within me. I realized that Professor Overstreet had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of my life, a crisis so profound that it forced me to confront the truth about my situation. I began to understand that my social anxiety wasn't unique. During the following weeks, I started paying attention to my fellow students. I noticed the nervous habits, the forced laughter, the way some would avoid eye contact or speak too quickly. When nervous, I discovered that even the most confident-appearing students had moments of doubt and social awkwardness. This revelation was my first glimpse into a fundamental truth about human nature. We're all struggling with similar fears and insecurities. The difference between those who succeed socially and those who don't isn't the absence of fear, but how they handled that fear. I made a decision that night that would change everything. Instead of avoiding social situations, I would seek them out. Instead of running from my fear of public speaking, I would face it head-on. I didn't know it then, but that moment of crisis was actually the first step toward discovering the principles that would eventually help millions of people overcome their own social fears and build meaningful connections with others. My transformation began with a simple observation that occurred during my second attempt to join the debate team the following semester. This time, instead of focusing on my own performance, I decided to watch how the successful members interacted with each other before and after meetings. What I discovered revolutionized my understanding of human connection. The most popular and effective speakers weren't necessarily the most brilliant or eloquent. They were the ones who showed genuine interest in others. I watched as Robert Mason, the team captain, would arrive early to each meeting and spend time asking other members about their lives, their challenges, their successes. I began to experiment with this approach in small ways. Instead of dreading conversations, I started preparing questions about the other person. When my roommate, Jim, came home from his part-time job at the local newspaper, instead of my usual grunt of acknowledgement, I asked him about the stories he was covering. His face lit up as he described interviewing a local farmer about new irrigation techniques. That conversation lasted 2 hours. Jim, who had always seemed distant and preoccupied, suddenly became animated and engaging. He shared his dreams of becoming a real journalist, his frustrations with mundane assignments, and his admiration for the great newspaper writers of our time. Most importantly, he began to see me differently, not as the awkward farm boy who barely spoke, but as someone who genuinely cared about his aspirations. I realized that my lifelong focus on myself, my fear, my awkwardness, my inadequacy, had been the very thing keeping me isolated. When I shifted that focus to others, something magical happened. My self-consciousness began to fade because I was too interested in the other person to worry about how I appeared. The real breakthrough came when I discovered the power of names. I had always been terrible at remembering people's names, partly because I was so nervous during introductions that I couldn't focus on anything except my own discomfort. But I learned that a person's name is the sweetest sound in any language to them. I started a simple practice. Whenever I met someone new, I would repeat their name 3 times during our first conversation. Nice to meet you, Margaret. Margaret, that's a beautiful name. My grandmother's name was Margaret too. This technique served 2 purposes. It helped me remember the name, and it made the other person feel special and noticed. The results were immediate and profound. People began responding to me differently. They would seek me out for conversations, invite me to join their activities, and treat me as someone worth knowing. I was discovering that people are starving for genuine attention and interest. But here's what truly shocked me: showing authentic interest in others didn't require me to be witty, brilliant, or charming. It simply required me to be curious about their experiences, their thoughts, and their feelings. This curiosity became my secret weapon against social anxiety. When I focused on learning about others, I had no mental energy left for self. The fear that had paralyzed me for years began to dissolve, replaced by genuine fascination with the incredible variety of human experience. I was building the foundation for what would become my life's work, helping people connect with each other through the simple but powerful act of sincere interest. The greatest social skill I ever developed came from an unlikely source: my complete inability to think of things to say. What I initially saw as my greatest weakness became my most powerful strength when I learned to transform my silence into something far more valuable: genuine listening. It happened during my 3rd semester at college, when I was assigned to interview local business owners for the school newspaper. I was terrified, but I needed the credits. My first interview was with Mr. Henderson, who owned the town's only bookstore. I had prepared a list of questions, but when I sat across from him in his cluttered office, my mind went completely blank. Instead of panicking and trying to fill the silence with nervous chatter, I simply said, "Mr. Henderson, I'd love to hear about how you started this bookstore." Then I did something revolutionary. I stopped talking and truly listened. For the next hour, Mr. Henderson told me the most fascinating story. He described leaving his job as a railroad clerk to pursue his dream, the challenges of convincing publishers to supply books to a small Missouri town, and his vision of creating a place where ideas could flourish. I found myself genuinely captivated by his passion and perseverance. When the interview ended, something unexpected happened. Mr. Henderson thanked me profusely, saying it was the best conversation he'd had in months. He told me I was a natural interviewer and invited me back any time. I walked away confused. I had barely said anything. How could saying less make me better at connecting with people? That's when I began to understand the difference between hearing and listening. Most people, I realized, are so eager to share their own thoughts that they barely pay attention to what others are saying. They're waiting for their turn to speak rather than truly absorbing what's being shared with them. I started experimenting with this discovery in everyday conversations. When my classmate Sarah mentioned she was struggling with her mathematics course, instead of immediately offering advice or changing the subject, I asked follow-up questions. What part of mathematics is giving you the most trouble? How does that make you feel about the class? What approaches have you tried so far? Sarah's response was remarkable. She opened up about her fear of appearing stupid, her frustration with the professor's teaching style, and her worry that she might fail the course. By the end of our conversation, she had actually talked herself into several solutions, and she thanked me for helping her think through the problem even though I had offered no advice whatsoever. I began to see listening as an act of generosity. In a world where everyone is competing for attention, giving someone your complete, undivided focus is one of the greatest gifts you can offer. When I listened, actively maintaining eye contact, asking thoughtful questions, and responding with genuine curiosity, people felt valued and understood. This principle revolutionized my social interactions. My former reputation as the quiet, awkward farm boy transformed into something entirely different. People began seeking me out, not because I was entertaining or brilliant, but because I made them feel heard. I discovered that being genuinely interested in others and showing that interest through active listening was more powerful than any clever conversation technique. The golden ear became my metaphor for this skill, the ability to listen with such focus and empathy that others feel truly understood. It was the foundation upon which all my future success in human relations would be built. The discovery that changed my social life forever came through the most unlikely teacher, a traveling salesman named Charlie, who stayed at our boarding house during my senior year of college. Charlie wasn't particularly handsome, wealthy, or educated, yet everywhere he went, people gravitated toward him like moths to a flame. I studied Charlie with the intensity of a scientist examining a rare specimen. What was his secret? After 3 days of careful observation, I identified the one thing that set him apart from everyone else: his smile. Not just any smile, but a genuine, warm expression that seemed to light up his entire face and radiate authentic joy. Charlie smiled at the boarding house landlady when she served burnt coffee. He smiled at the grumpy desk clerk at the local hotel. He smiled at children playing in the street and at elderly folks sitting on their porches. But here's what fascinated me most. His smile wasn't forced or fake. It came from a place of genuine pleasure in connecting with others. I decided to conduct an experiment. For 1 week, I would try to smile at every person I encountered, even though smiling felt as foreign to me as speaking French. The first day was excruciating. My face felt like it was cracking, and I was certain everyone could see through my artificial expression. But I persisted. The results were immediate and startling. The stern librarian who usually glared at students suddenly became helpful and friendly. The cafeteria worker who typically slopped food onto plates began taking care to make my meals look appealing. Even Professor Williams, known for his intimidating demeanor, started acknowledging me in the hallways. But the real revelation came when I began to understand the science behind smiling. I discovered that the physical act of smiling actually triggers positive emotions in the brain. When I forced myself to smile, I genuinely began to feel happier and more optimistic. The smile wasn't just changing how others perceived MIT, it was changing how I perceived the world. More importantly, I learned that smiles are remarkably contagious. When I smiled at someone, they almost invariably smiled back, creating an instant moment of connection and warmth. It was as if I had discovered a universal language that transcended words, age, and social barriers. I began practicing different types of smiles. There was the warm greeting smile for new acquaintances, the encouraging smile for someone sharing difficulties, and the celebratory smile for others' successes. Each situation called for a slightly different expression, but the underlying principle remained the same. Genuine smile communicates interest, acceptance, and goodwill. The transformation in my social interactions was dramatic. People who had barely noticed me before began initiating conversations. I was invited to join study groups, social gatherings, and even the previously exclusive literary society. The shy farm boy who once hid from human contact was becoming someone others actively sought out. But perhaps most importantly, I discovered that a smile was the perfect antidote to social anxiety. When I focused on genuinely smiling at others, I couldn't simultaneously worry about how I was being judged. The smile shifted my attention from my internal fears to external connection, making every social interaction feel like a small celebration rather than a test I might fail. One of my most profound social breakthroughs happened during a chance encounter with the college president, Dr. Brandenburg, in the campus library. I was researching for a paper on American agriculture when I noticed him sitting alone at a nearby table, looking frustrated as he flipped through a thick agricultural journal. My first instinct was to keep my head down and avoid any interaction. After all, what could a poor farm boy possibly have in common with a distinguished president of the college? But then I noticed the specific journal he was reading. It was about modern farming techniques, a subject I knew intimately from years of working on my family's farm. Gathering courage I didn't know I possessed, I quietly approached his table. "Excuse me, Dr. Brandenburg, I couldn't help but notice you're reading about crop rotation techniques. I've actually implemented some of those methods on my family's farm back home." His face transformed with interest. For the next 2 hours, we engaged in the most stimulating conversation of my college career. Dr. Brandenburg was trying to understand agricultural challenges for a speech. He was preparing about rural education. I shared practical insights about soil management, weather patterns, and the economic realities facing small farmers. What amazed me was how this distinguished academic, who usually seemed so intimidating and unreachable, became animated and friendly. When we found our common ground, he asked detailed questions about my family's farming methods, and I found myself speaking with confidence about subjects I truly understood. That conversation taught me a fundamental truth about human connection. No matter how different people may appear on the surface, there are always bridges waiting to be discovered. Everyone has experiences, interests, or challenges that can connect them to others if we take the time to look for those bridges. I began actively searching for common ground in every interaction. When I met a wealthy classmate from St. Louis, instead of focusing on our different backgrounds, I discovered we both loved reading adventure novels. When I encountered a stern professor known for his difficult examinations, I learned he shared my fascination with Abraham Lincoln's speeches. The key was learning to ask the right questions and listen for connection points, instead of assuming differences were barriers. I started viewing them as opportunities to learn something new while finding unexpected similarities. A sophisticated student from New York and a farm boy from Missouri might seem to have nothing in common, but both might share concerns about their future careers, admiration for certain authors, or experiences with difficult family relationships. Developed what I called the bridge builders approach. In every conversation, I would mentally construct connections between my experiences and the other person's life. Sometimes these bridges were obvious shared hometowns or mutual acquaintances. Other times they were more subtle, similar challenges, parallel emotions, or comparable dreams. This principle proved especially powerful when dealing with people who initially seemed hostile or disinterested. I discovered that even the most standoffish individuals would warm up when I found something we genuinely shared. The gruff maintenance supervisor became friendly when I showed interest in his woodworking hobby. The aloof debate team member opened up when we discovered we both struggled with perfectionism. Finding common ground became my secret weapon for transforming potentially awkward social situations into meaningful connections that lasted far beyond the initial encounter. The moment I truly understood the power of questions came during my first job as a traveling salesman for the international correspondence schools. I was terrified of rejection and had no idea how to start conversations with potential customers. So I developed what I thought was a cowardly approach. I would ask questions instead of making bold sales pitches. My first call was to a farmer named Bill Patterson, who had a reputation for being gruff and unfriendly to salesmen. Instead of launching into my prepared speech about correspondence courses, I nervously asked, "Mr. Patterson, I'm curious about your farming operation. What's been your biggest challenge this season?" What happened next amazed me. Bill's stern expression softened, and he began telling me about his struggles with a new strain of corn blight that was threatening his entire crop. For 30 minutes, He shared his concerns, his attempted solutions, and his fears about the financial impact on his family. As he talked, I listened carefully and asked follow-up questions. How did you first notice the blight? What methods have you tried so far? Do other farmers in the area face the same problem? I wasn't trying to sell him anything. I was genuinely curious about his situation. By the end of our conversation, Bill had not only purchased a correspondence course in agricultural science, but he had also invited me to dinner with his family and recommended me to 3 neighboring farmers. I had stumbled upon a revolutionary discovery. Questions are more powerful than statements in creating connections and influence. I began to understand why questions worked so effectively. When I made statements about my products or myself, I was essentially asking people to focus on me and my agenda. But when I asked thoughtful questions about their lives, challenges, and interests, I was giving them the gift of attention and the opportunity to share what mattered most to them. Questions also served as keys that unlocked different aspects of people's personalities and experiences. A simple question, like what got you interested in teaching, could reveal someone's passion, their background, their values, and their dreams. Each answer provided material for more questions and deeper connection. I developed different types of questions for different situations. Open-ended questions like what's been the most rewarding part of your work encouraged people to share their thoughts and feelings. Specific questions like how did you solve that problem showed genuine interest in their expertise. Personal questions like what would you do differently if you started over invited them to share their wisdom and reflections. But I learned that not all questions are created equal. Generic questions like how are you often received generic answers. The questions that created real connection were those that showed I had been listening and that I genuinely cared about the person's response. You mentioned earlier that you're working on expanding your business. What's been the most exciting part of that process? Perhaps most importantly, I discovered that questions could transform my social anxiety into curiosity. Instead of worrying about what to say next, I could focus on what I wanted to learn about the other person. This shift from performance anxiety to genuine curiosity made conversations feel natural and enjoyable rather than stressful and forced. Questions became my social superpower, turning every interaction into an opportunity for discovery and connection. They were the keys that opened doors to meaningful relationships and transformed me from a nervous farm boy into someone people sought out for. Conversation. My greatest lesson in handling disagreement came from what should have been my most humiliating social failure. During my second year selling correspondence courses, I encountered a wealthy businessman named Mr. Thompson who disagreed with everything I said about education and self-improvement. "Young man," he declared with obvious disdain, "all this talk about correspondence courses is nonsense. Real education happens in universities, not through mail-order schemes." His words stung because I was a correspondence course student myself. Having never had the money for a traditional 4-year degree, my first instinct was to argue back, to defend my company and prove him wrong with facts and statistics. I had prepared responses for every objection, and I was ready to battle for my position, but something made me pause. Perhaps it was remembering how terrible I felt after arguments with my father about farming methods, or how debates at college always left everyone more entrenched in their original positions. Instead of fighting back, I took a breath and said something that surprised us both. "Mr. Thompson, you've obviously had extensive experience with traditional education. I'd be interested to hear about what made university learning so valuable for you." The change in his demeanor was immediate and dramatic. His aggressive posture relaxed, and he began sharing stories about his Harvard education, his professors, and the relationships he had formed with classmates. For 20 minutes, he spoke passionately about the value of campus life, library resources, and face-to-face instruction. As he talked, I listened carefully and asked thoughtful questions about his experiences. What was the most influential class you took? Which professor had the greatest impact on your thinking? How did those college relationships affect your business career? Then something remarkable happened. After fully expressing his views and feeling heard and respected, Mr. Thompson began to soften his stance. Of course, he said thoughtfully, I suppose not everyone has the opportunity to attend university like I did, and I imagine some people might benefit from the flexibility of studying at their own pace. By the end of our conversation, not only had Mr. Thompson purchased a correspondence course for his nephew who couldn't afford college, but he had also invited me to speak at his business association about educational opportunities for working adults. This experience taught me that disagreement doesn't have to mean conflict. When someone disagrees with you, they're not necessarily attacking you personally, they're simply expressing a different perspective based on their own experiences and beliefs. The secret is to find out why they hold that perspective instead of immediately trying to change it. I learned to use phrases that acknowledged their right to their opinion while keeping the conversation respectful. I can understand why you might feel that way, or that's an interesting perspective. What led you to that conclusion? These responses validated their viewpoint without requiring me to abandon my own. Most importantly, I discovered that when people feel heard and respected in their disagreement, they become much more open to hearing alternative viewpoints. The goal isn't to win arguments, but to maintain relationships and find mutual understanding. This approach transformed potentially hostile encounters into opportunities for deeper connection and mutual respect, proving that the way you handle disagreement often matters more than the disagreement itself. The transformation from terrified farm boy to confident speaker didn't happen overnight. It was built through a systematic approach to preparation that eliminated my social anxiety by replacing fear with competence. The breakthrough came when I finally understood that confidence isn't something you're born with. It's something you build through deliberate practice and thorough preparation. My first real test came when the YMCA in New York asked me to teach a course on public speaking and human relations. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same person who had once been too scared to speak up in church was now being asked to teach others how to communicate effectively. But this opportunity forced me to develop what I call the 3 levels of conversation. Readiness. Level 1 was content preparation. Before any social or professional interaction, I would research the people I might meet, the topics likely to be discussed, and current events that might arise. I carried a small notebook where I jotted down interesting stories, thought-provoking questions, and relevant facts. This preparation gave me a mental toolkit I could draw from instead of panicking when conversations took unexpected turns. Level 2 was emotional preparation. I learned to visualize successful interactions before they happened. Instead of imagining all the ways I might embarrass myself, I would spend time picturing confident conversations, positive responses from others, and meaningful connections being formed. This mental rehearsal trained my mind to expect success rather than failure. Level 3 was practical preparation. I would practice conversations aloud, sometimes in front of a mirror, working on my posture, eye contact, and voice projection. I memorized opening lines for different situations and practiced transitioning smoothly between topics. This physical preparation helped my body feel ready to perform when the moment arrived. The real test came during my first YMCA class. 25 nervous businessmen sat before me, expecting me to transform them from tongue-tied introverts into confident speakers. My own nerves were screaming, but my preparation held me steady. I had researched each participant's background, prepared relevant examples from my own journey, and practiced every section of my presentation. As I began sharing my story of transformation, from social awkwardness to relative confidence, something magical happened. The participants began nodding in recognition, sharing their own struggles, and engaging with the material in ways that felt natural and spontaneous. My careful preparation had given me the foundation to be genuinely present with them, rather than focusing on my own anxiety. This experience taught me that preparation is the antidote to social fear. When you know what you're talking about, when you've considered different scenarios, and when you've practiced your responses, you can focus on connecting with others rather than worrying about your performance. I developed a simple system that served me throughout my career. Before any important social or professional interaction, I would ask myself 3 questions. What do I want to accomplish? What might the other person be interested in discussing? How can I be genuinely helpful or interesting to them? This framework gave every conversation a purpose beyond just getting through it without embarrassment. The confidence that comes from preparation is different from arrogance or false bravado. It's a quiet assurance that you have something valuable to offer and that you're ready to engage meaningfully with others. This type of confidence is accessible to anyone willing to invest the time and effort in thorough preparation. The ability to read social situations accurately became my secret navigation system, guiding me through complex interpersonal dynamics that once seemed impossible to understand. This skill developed gradually through careful observation and countless mistakes that taught me to pay attention to the subtle signals people constantly send. My education in social awareness began during my early days teaching at the YMCA, when I noticed that the same presentation could succeed brilliantly with one group and fall completely flat with another. The content was identical, but something was different about each audience that I couldn't initially identify. I started arriving early to observe participants as they entered the room. With the evening business class, men would stride in confidently, checking their watches and discussing stock prices. They responded well to direct, practical advice delivered with authority. But the afternoon women's group entered more hesitantly, greeting each other warmly and sharing personal updates. They preferred stories, emotional connections, and collaborative discussions. This observation led me to develop what I called my social compass, a mental framework for quickly assessing the mood, energy level, and needs of any group or individual. I learned to notice physical cues like posture, facial expressions, and eye contact patterns. Crossed arms and avoided eye contact usually indicated defensiveness or discomfort. Leaning forward and nodding suggested engagement and interest. But reading the room went beyond just observing body language. I began paying attention to the emotional undercurrents in conversations. When someone's words said, "I'm fine, but their tone suggested otherwise, I learned to respond to the emotion rather than just the words. When a group seemed restless during a presentation, I would pause and ask questions, rather than pushing forward with my planned content. One of my most valuable discoveries was learning to identify different personality types and adjust my approach accordingly. Some people were natural talkers who needed space to express themselves with them. I would ask open-ended questions and listen patiently. Others were more reserved and needed gentle encouragement to share their thoughts. They responded better to specific questions and extra time to formulate responses. I also learned to recognize group dynamics. In every social gathering, there are usually informal leaders who influence the mood and direction of conversations. By identifying these key individuals and engaging them positively, I could often shift the entire atmosphere of a room. Sometimes, the person with the most influence wasn't the one with the highest title, but rather the one others naturally looked to for cues. The most challenging skill was learning to adapt my own communication style to match what each situation required. With analytical personalities, I would present logical arguments and concrete evidence. With emotional personalities, I would share stories and focus on feelings and relationships. With action-oriented people, I would be direct and focus on practical solutions. This adaptability didn't mean being fake or manipulative. It meant being considerate enough to communicate in ways that others could best receive and understand. Just as I would speak more slowly to someone learning English, I learned to adjust my social approach to match what would be most effective and comfortable for each person and situation. Reading the room became second nature, allowing me to navigate complex social situations with confidence and help others feel comfortable and understood. The most powerful social skill I ever mastered wasn't speaking or listening, it was the art of genuine encouragement. This discovery came through observing my own transformation and recognizing how much my growth had been fueled by the few people who had believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. I remember Professor Miller, my literature instructor, who pulled me aside after a particularly difficult class discussion where I had stammered through an answer about Walt Whitman. Instead of focusing on my obvious nervousness, he said, "Dale, you have a unique perspective on how literature connects to real life. I hope you'll continue sharing your insights with the class." Those few words of encouragement changed everything. For me, Professor Miller had seen something valuable in my contribution that I couldn't see myself. His belief in my potential gave me courage to participate more actively in future discussions, eventually leading to some of my most meaningful college experiences. This experience taught me that everyone carries within them a deep hunger for recognition and appreciation. Most people go through their days feeling undervalued and unnoticed. When you become someone who consistently offers genuine encouragement, you become like a lighthouse in their world, a source of hope and energy they naturally gravitate toward. Began experimenting with encouragement in my teaching and sales work. Instead of focusing on what people were doing wrong, I started looking for what they were doing right and acknowledging it specifically. When a shy student in my public speaking class managed to deliver even a few sentences clearly, I would highlight that achievement. "John, your opening statement was delivered with perfect clarity. You commanded the room's attention immediately." The key was learning the difference between genuine encouragement and empty flattery. Effective encouragement is specific, timely, and focused on effort or improvement rather than just natural talent. Instead of saying "you're a great speaker," I would say, "the way you paused to let that important point sink in showed real awareness of your audience." I discovered that encouragement works best when it acknowledges the struggle involved in achievement. When someone overcame a challenge or showed improvement in a difficult area, recognizing both the effort and the result created a powerful emotional connection. I know public speaking has been challenging for you, which makes your progress in connecting with the audience even more impressive. But perhaps most importantly, I learned that encouragement must be authentic to be effective. People can sense when praise is manufactured or manipulative. The encouragement that truly impacts people comes from genuinely noticing their efforts, their growth, and their unique contributions. I started keeping what I called a golden medal mindset, always looking for opportunities to recognize and celebrate others' achievements, no matter how small. This wasn't about giving participation trophies or false praise, but about developing the habit of noticing when people were making genuine efforts to improve or contribute. The results were transformational, both for others and for myself. People began seeking me out not just for advice, but for the energy and confidence that came from being around someone who consistently saw their potential. Students became more willing to take risks in their learning. Business clients became more open to trying new approaches. Most surprisingly, focusing on encouraging others eliminated much of my remaining social anxiety. When I walked into a room looking for opportunities to genuinely appreciate and encourage others, I had no mental energy left for worrying about my own performance or acceptance. My most embarrassing social blunder became my greatest teacher about resilience and recovery. It happened during a formal dinner hosted by one of New York's most prominent business leaders, where I had been invited to speak about my correspondence coursework. I was determined to make a perfect impression on these influential men who could advance my career. Everything went wrong. I spilled red wine on the white tablecloth while gesturing enthusiastically during my presentation. I mispronounced the host's name twice, despite having practiced it beforehand. Worst of all, I completely forgot my main point mid-sentence and stood there stammering while 20 distinguished businessmen stared at me in awkward silence. My old instincts screamed at me to flee, to make excuses, to somehow pretend these mistakes hadn't happened. But instead, I took a deep breath and did something that surprised everyone in the room, including myself. I laughed. "Gentlemen," I said, with genuine humor, "I believe I've just demonstrated every public speaking mistake possible in record time. I've baptized your beautiful tablecloth, mangled our host's name, and completely lost my train of thought. If you'd like a lesson in what not to do, I'm apparently your man." The room erupted in laughter and applause. The tension dissolved immediately, and the host stood up, raising his glass to Dale Carnegie, who just reminded us that perfection is overrated and authenticity is priceless. That evening led to 3 major business opportunities and several lasting friendships. This experience taught me that people don't expect perfection, they connect with humanity. When you make a mistake and handle it with grace, humor, and honesty, you often create deeper connections than if you had performed flawlessly. Your vulnerability gives others permission to be human too. I developed what I called the Phoenix approach to social recovery. Like the mythical bird that rises from ashes, you can often emerge stronger from social mistakes than you were before. The key is to acknowledge the mistake quickly, take responsibility without excessive self-deprecation, and either fix it, if possible, or move forward with confidence. When I mispronounced someone's name, I would immediately say, "I apologize. Want to make sure I'm saying your name correctly. Could you help me with the pronunciation?" This turned an embarrassing mistake into a moment of respect and attention for the other person. When I forgot what I was saying during presentations, I learned to pause and honestly admit it. "I've lost my train of thought for a moment. Let me collect myself and give you the clear information you deserve." Audiences appreciated the honesty and often became more engaged as a result. The most important lesson was learning that most people are far more forgiving and understanding than we imagine. They've all made similar mistakes and can relate to the discomfort of social blunders. When you handle mistakes with grace rather than defensiveness or excessive apology, you demonstrate emotional maturity that people admire and remember. Social mistakes became opportunities to show authenticity, resilience, and the ability to maintain composure under pressure, qualities that actually enhanced rather than damaged my reputation and relationships. The transformation from lonely outsider to someone with a rich network of meaningful relationships didn't happen by accident. Required a deliberate strategy for building and maintaining connections that went far beyond surface-level networking. My approach evolved from the painful realization that I had spent years waiting for others to invite me into their circles, instead of taking initiative to create my own. The breakthrough came when I stopped thinking about networking as taking from others and started viewing it as giving value to people's lives. Instead of approaching potential connections with the question, "What can this person do for me?" I began asking, "How can I be genuinely helpful to this person?" My first experiment was organizing informal discussion groups at the YMCA rather than waiting to be invited to existing social circles. I created a weekly gathering where people could discuss books, current events, and personal development topics. I sent handwritten invitations to interesting people I had met: the thoughtful bank clerk, the ambitious shop owner, the retired teacher with fascinating stories. The magic happened when I focused on connecting others rather than just promoting myself. During these gatherings, I would introduce the bank clerk to the shop owner because they both had entrepreneurial interests. I would connect the retired teacher with a young father who was struggling with his children's education. By becoming a connector and facilitator rather than just another participant, I made myself valuable to everyone in the group. This approach taught me the fundamental principle of relationship building. Quality trumps quantity every time. Instead of trying to meet as many people as possible, I focused on developing genuine, mutually beneficial relationships with individuals who shared my values and interests. I discovered that 10 strong connections who knew and trusted me were far more valuable than 100 superficial acquaintances. I developed what I called the web strategy for expanding my network organically. Each genuine relationship I built became a node that could connect me to other like-minded people. When I helped the bank clerk with a business presentation, he introduced me to other professionals in the banking community. When I mentored the shop owner's son in public speaking, the grateful father recommended me to his business association. But building relationships required more than just initial connections, demanded consistent follow-through and genuine care. I kept detailed notes about people's interests, challenges, and goals. When I read an article that might interest someone in my network, I would send it to them with a personal note. When I heard about opportunities that might benefit them, I would make introductions or recommendations. The most important lesson was learning the difference between networking and relationship building. Networking often feels transactional and self-serving. True relationship building is about creating mutual value, offering support during difficult times, and celebrating others' successes even when there's no immediate benefit to yourself. I also discovered that the strongest relationships often developed around shared activities and common purposes, rather than just social gatherings. Working together on projects, collaborating to solve problems, or supporting each other through challenges created bonds that lasted decades. By the time I had established myself professionally, my social circle included not just business contacts, but genuine friends who enriched my life immeasurably and provided support, wisdom, and joy that went far beyond any professional benefits. The transformation from socially awkward farm boy to successful businessman happened through the deliberate application of human relations principles in professional settings. Every career advancement I achieved came not from technical expertise alone, but from my ability to connect with people, understand their needs, and build relationships that created mutual success. My first major professional breakthrough came when I was selling correspondence courses to businesses. Traditional salesmen would focus on product features and aggressive closing techniques, but I took a completely different approach. Instead of trying to convince prospects to buy, I would spend time understanding their specific business challenges and employee development needs. I remember walking into the offices of the Packard Motor Company, where the training manager, Mr. Roberts, was clearly skeptical about correspondence education. Rather than launching into my sales presentation, I asked him about his biggest challenges in developing his workforce. For an hour, he described the difficulties of training factory workers who had little formal education but tremendous practical intelligence. As he talked, I listened carefully and asked thoughtful questions about his specific situation. Only after I thoroughly understood his needs did I explain how our courses could address his exact challenges. But more importantly, I offered to customize the program based on our conversation and to personally ensure his employees received the support they needed to succeed. Mr. Roberts didn't just buy courses. He became one of my strongest advocates, recommending my services to other companies and inviting me to speak at industry conferences. This pattern repeated throughout my sales career because I had learned that professional success comes from solving other people's problems, not just promoting your own products. The same principles that worked in sales proved invaluable when I transitioned to teaching and speaking. Instead of positioning myself as the expert who had all the answers, I approached each engagement as a collaboration where I would share what I had learned while remaining genuinely curious about my audience's experiences and insights. This collaborative approach led to the development of my most famous course, How to Win Friends and Influence People. The content emerged from countless conversations with business professionals about their real-world challenges in human relations. I wasn't teaching abstract theories. I was sharing practical solutions that had been tested and refined through actual experience. My reputation grew because I consistently delivered value beyond what was expected. When companies hired me to train their employees in public speaking, I would also offer insights about team communication and leadership development. When I spoke at business conferences, I would make myself available for individual consultations and follow-up support. But perhaps most importantly, I learned that professional networking is most effective when it's based on genuine relationships rather than transactional exchanges. The businessmen who became my strongest supporters and collaborators were those with whom I had developed authentic friendships based on mutual respect and shared values. I discovered that the handshake, that simple gesture of greeting and agreement, became a symbol of trust and partnership. But the real power wasn't in the physical gesture. It was in the relationship of mutual benefit and respect that the handshake represented. The shy farm boy who once hid from human contact had become someone that major corporations sought out for guidance on human relations. This transformation happened not because I learned to hide my authentic self, but because I learned to channel my natural empathy and genuine interest in others into professional expertise that created value for everyone involved. The true measure of my transformation became clear not through my own success, but through witnessing how the principles I had discovered began transforming the lives of others, like a stone thrown into still water. Each person who overcame their social awkwardness created ripples that touched countless other lives in ways I never could have imagined. One of my earliest students was a young man named Robert, a brilliant engineer who was so paralyzed by social anxiety that he couldn't present his innovative ideas to his company's leadership. He would arrive at my classes 30 minutes early and sit in the back row, barely making eye contact with other participants. His technical knowledge was extraordinary, but his fear of social interaction was keeping him trapped in junior positions. Working with Robert, I applied every technique I had developed for overcoming social awkwardness. We practiced genuine interest in others, active listening, asking thoughtful questions, and finding common ground. Slowly, Robert began to emerge from his shell. The breakthrough came when he successfully presented a cost-saving proposal to his company's board of directors, speaking with confidence and connecting with his audience. But the real revelation came 6 months later when Robert contacted me with an update. Not only had he been promoted to chief engineer, but he had started mentoring other shy employees in his company. He was teaching them the same principles that had transformed his own life. Robert had become what I called a ripple creator, someone who spreads the ability to connect authentically with others. This pattern repeated throughout my teaching career. Students who overcame their social fears didn't just improve their own lives, they became more effective parents, better team leaders, more supportive friends, and stronger community members. A shy accountant who learned to engage confidently with colleagues became a more encouraging father to his children. A nervous secretary who developed genuine listening skills became a trusted confidant to her friends and family, i.e., began to understand that social skills aren't just individual capabilities, they're gifts that keep giving to everyone around us. When you learn to make others feel heard, valued, and understood, you don't just improve your own relationships, you model behavior that others begin to emulate in their own interactions. The ripple effect became most apparent in my corporate training programs. When executives learned to show genuine interest in their employees and encourage their development, Those employees became more engaged and began treating their own team members with greater respect and consideration. The positive changes would cascade through entire organizations, improving morale, productivity, and retention. But with this influence came a profound sense of responsibility. I realized that the principles I was teaching could be used to manipulate and exploit others, or they could be used to genuinely serve and uplift people. The difference lay not in the techniques themselves, but in the intentions and character of the person applying them. This responsibility shaped how I taught and wrote about human relations. I emphasized that these skills must be grounded in genuine care for others, authentic interest in their well-being, and a sincere desire to add value to their lives. The goal wasn't to become more effective at getting what you want from people, but to become someone who enriches the lives of everyone you encounter. The stone I had thrown into the water as a terrified farm boy had created ripples that were now touching lives around the world, proving that overcoming social awkwardness isn't just a personal victory, it's a gift to humanity. After decades of studying and teaching human relations, I discovered that true social mastery goes far beyond overcoming awkwardness. It involves developing the ability to inspire others to become their best selves through the power of authentic connection and influence. This advanced level requires integrating all the fundamental skills into a seamless approach that creates transformation in every interaction. The highest level of social skill I achieved was what I called invisible leadership, the ability to guide and influence others so naturally that they felt empowered rather than manipulated. This required perfect mastery of reading people's deepest needs and motivations, then communicating in ways that helped them see possibilities they hadn't recognized in themselves. I learned to identify what each person valued most: recognition, security, achievement, belonging, or purpose, and then frame every interaction in terms of those core values. When speaking with someone driven by achievement, I would focus on how our collaboration could help them reach new levels of success. With someone motivated by belonging, I would emphasize how their contributions strengthened our shared community. But the most sophisticated skill was learning to see and develop potential in others that they couldn't see in themselves. This required looking beyond current behavior to recognize underlying capabilities and then creating experiences that would draw out those hidden strengths. I became a sculptor of human potential, helping people discover abilities they never knew they possessed. The master's toolkit I developed included advanced techniques for managing group dynamics and facilitating collective achievement. I learned to identify the informal power structures in any organization or gathering, then work with those natural leaders to create positive momentum. I could walk into a room full of strangers and within an hour understand the personality types, relationship dynamics, and hidden tensions that were affecting group performance. Advanced influence required moving beyond simple persuasion to what I called aligned inspiration. Instead of trying to convince people to do what I wanted, I learned to help them discover what they truly wanted and then show them how our collaboration could help them achieve those goals. This approach created enthusiastic partners rather than reluctant followers. I also mastered the art of strategic vulnerability, knowing exactly when and how to share personal struggles or uncertainties in ways that deepened trust and connection, without undermining authority. This required exceptional emotional intelligence and timing, but when done correctly, it could transform formal relationships into powerful partnerships. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that true social mastery means using these advanced skills solely in service of others' growth and well-being. The greatest practitioners of human relations aren't those who can manipulate most effectively, but those who can inspire most authentically. They use their influence to help others overcome limitations, discover their potential, and create meaningful contributions to their communities. The ultimate test of social mastery isn't how many people follow you, but how many people become leaders themselves because of your influence. When you've truly mastered human relations, your greatest satisfaction comes from seeing others discover their own power to connect, inspire, and transform the lives around them. This level of social skill transforms every interaction into an opportunity for mutual growth, every conversation into a chance for deeper understanding, and every relationship into a force for positive change in the world. As I reflect on the complete transformation from a terrified farm boy who couldn't speak up in church to someone who helped millions overcome their social fears, I want to leave you with the roadmap that can guide your own journey from social awkwardness to meaningful connection. Your transformation begins with the same realization that changed my life. Social awkwardness isn't a permanent character flaw. It's simply a skill gap that can be filled through deliberate practice and genuine commitment to connecting with others. Every confident person you admire once felt the same. Fears and uncertainties you're experiencing now start with the foundation I discovered: genuine interest in others. Tomorrow, choose one person in your life and ask them a thoughtful question about something that matters to them. Listen to their answer with complete attention. Ask follow-up questions, and notice how this simple shift from self-focus to other focus immediately reduces your social anxiety. Practice the golden ear of active listening in your next 3 conversations. Resist the urge to think about what you'll say next. Instead, concentrate entirely on understanding what the other person is sharing. You'll be amazed at how much more comfortable and confident you feel when your attention is fully engaged with others, rather than focused on your own performance. Master the power of the genuine, smile, and strategic questions. These are your universal keys to unlocking connections with anyone, anywhere. A warm smile communicates acceptance and interest before you say a single word, while thoughtful questions demonstrate that you value the other person's thoughts and experiences. Embrace the art of finding common ground. Look for shared experiences, similar challenges, or mutual interests that can bridge any apparent differences between you and others. Remember that beneath surface differences, all humans share remarkably similar needs for understanding, acceptance, and connection. Handle disagreements with grace by seeking first to understand rather than to be understood. When someone disagrees with you, ask them to help you understand their perspective instead of immediately defending your own position. This approach transforms potential conflicts into opportunities for deeper connection. Prepare for social interactions with the same diligence you would bring to any important task. Know something about the people you'll meet. Have relevant topics ready for discussion, and visualize successful outcomes rather than dwelling on potential embarrassments. When you make social mistakes, and you will handle them with honesty, humor, and quick recovery. Remember that people connect with humanity, not perfection. Your vulnerable moments often create deeper bonds than your polished performances. Build your social circle deliberately by focusing on quality relationships rather than quantity of contacts. Become a connector who introduces others and creates value in their lives. Give generously of your attention, encouragement, and support without keeping score. Apply these principles in your professional life to accelerate your career advancement. The same skills that overcome social awkwardness also create leadership presence, improve team dynamics, and open doors to opportunities. Most importantly, use your growing social confidence to create positive ripples in the lives of others. As you overcome your own awkwardness, help others do the same. Become someone who makes others feel heard, valued, and understood. Your social transformation journey doesn't end with personal confidence. It culminates in becoming a force for connection, an encouragement in the world. The shy, awkward person you are today has the potential to become someone who transforms every room. You enter through the simple but powerful gift of authentic human connection. The graduation diploma you earn from overcoming social awkwardness isn't just personal achievement, it's your certification to help others find their own voice and confidence. Begin today. The world needs the connections only you can create.